Hello, everybody. I hope that all is well and that everyone is healthy. This is your fellow classmate David Golden, and I will be doing a video presentation on the Chinese principle of Li and why it should be practiced in accordance with a Confucian worldview. In this presentation, I will not be showing my face because I've been looking a lot like a hobo lately, but I have added some nice pictures for y'all. Presenting like this is kind of unorthodox for me, but I hope that you enjoy it and just follow along with the outline, and I think it'll be okay. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the key definitions that I listed off on my outline. So the first key definition that I listed off is Li. So this term can be understood in Chinese philosophy as ritual conduct within cultural/societal establishments. And I said that a simple example could be the expectation that after someone does something for you or gives you something, that you say thank you. That's a very simple example. Other examples are kind of shown in these pictures. It could be maybe an engagement, a funeral, just things like that. So there's societal establishments or expectations. So the next definition that I'm going to give is a Taoist. So a Taoist can be understood as a Chinese philosophical tradition that pursues living in harmony with Tao. In other words, they believe that there is a natural flow or way of life that is not to be infringed upon. And someone who I will be talking about in regards to this view is Lao Tzu. He is often quoted in believing such things about how there is a natural flow to life that people should not be altering with learning or social establishments or anything like that. And the last definition that I'm going to give off here is Ziren, or the way of the cosmos. And this Chinese philosophical term can be understood as one's unaltered and natural way of growth, development, and expression. This is kind of just the specifics regarding the Taoist point of view in regards to what's natural and what should not be infringed upon. There's a natural growth that one is to live out, and oftentimes people see Li or aspects of Li as an infringement on this natural growth and development. And now I'm going to list off the questions that I put on the outline. These are just questions that I hope for y'all to consider as we're kind of going through this presentation. So, do I believe that Li is artificial and thus should not be practiced? If yes or no, then why? Second question, how do I think the world would be impacted if everyone thought that Li was fake and should not be practiced? Third question, do you think the reasoning behind Confucius's view of Li is valid? And the fourth question is, what political views do I disagree with, and what values may lie behind them? Does this make me more sympathetic and understanding towards those views? I know the political question hasn't really been addressed yet, but that's something that I'll talk about towards the end of my presentation. So I'm going to go right into the main points and objections of my presentation. So the first one, the root of Li, which you should have kind of briefly read in my paper. Confucius believed that the root of Li is simply found in knowing that some actions are better than others at certain times. When observing the right action to take, one should consider the cultural/social traditions or expectations that may lie behind an action. One example to kind of make sense of this principle is when let's say you're watching the news and you hear that someone tragically died. You aren't as inclined to get as upset as if someone who was close to you, like a best friend, if his or her grandparent died, then you find it more appropriate to show some sort of emotion or sympathy towards them. So as you make these judgments, these social judgments in life, that is really wise of you to do, and that's the root of Lee, is to know what you ought to do in certain situations. And the next point that I'm going to go into here is Lee as an obstacle to the way. So Lao Tzu believed that Lee is artificial and hinders the way of the cosmos. Because of this hindrance, people are kept from their greatest potential and their greatest self, which lies in an unaltered and untouched reality for them. In this light, knowledge and education from others is also looked down upon. And I kind of found this odd and a little bizarre, because Lao Tzu was trying to teach and educate people on a principle that kind of contradicted this very saying, which was knowledge and education isn't really beneficial because it hinders from your natural way. But anyway, to kind of give an example of how this thinking might work, the social expectation to propose and to be given in marriage may hinder one from a natural inclination, which could include just staying with a partner without all that stuff. Whatever the situation is, aspects of Lee, in accordance to this thinking, is said to keep you from the natural way of growth that will always be better than following what is expected from others. And the next main point is universal values. In my paper, I argued alongside Confucius's view and value of Li. I claimed that although there are different ways of practicing Li, there lies universal values behind all forms of Li. For this reason, I believe that, and I believe Confucius believed, Li should be valued in practice because it harmonizes humans with nature. Knowledge is also to be valued. I kind of stated that and why Confucius believes that in my paper as well. But knowledge is to be valued in order to know what actions of Li brings the most social harmony. So if you don't know that saying thank you to someone after they give you something is polite, that is a hindrance of Li, and furthermore a hindrance potentially to social harmony. I believe that Confucius believed Li acts as a guide for those universal values. We all want to be respected. We all want to be treated some type of way, and those values are kind of rested behind Li. And are kind of communicated through aspects of Li. I kind of talk about that in my paper, how we look at different things about Li. You know, Li could be in a funeral. Well, the value behind wanting to throw a funeral is to honor the life that someone had. And so I see that as a universal value. I believe people want to be honored, and so they do something about that. And that might look different depending on a culture. You may have one that burns a candle in front of the tombstone, or someone says no, you should leave flowers. Whatever it is, there's a similar, same value that lies behind both of those actions. And this brings me into my next point, which is the golden rule. So the golden rule was something that was clearly expressed by Confucius and is really key in understanding why Li is to be practiced and why it brings social harmony. I claim that you cannot expect one to treat others as themselves unless they had some sort of universal standards of value or treatment. This universal standard of value, as I said before, is what really lies behind Li. And furthermore, it is important, as I said in my paper, to not just do to others what you want yourself, but also to put yourself in their shoes, culture, feelings, and traditions. Because in reality, this is the next step in the principle of the golden rule, because you would want others to also put themselves in your shoes or your culture and your feelings or traditions when treating you a certain way. And so maybe an example of this is, let's say in the South, it is respectful to address people as sir or ma'am. They find that as a sign of respect. But in the North, let's say that is disrespectful because they think it makes them seem old or whatsoever. And if someone's from the South and they go to the North, if they just live by the principles of treating others as themselves, but then stop there, they might address people as sir or ma'am because that's what they would want, but they in fact find that as disrespectful. And so what they would need to do is put themselves in kind of, you could say, a northern mindset to where, okay, the people in the North find that disrespectful, so I'm going to address them in whatever way they find not disrespectful. And that is what I'm talking about in that next step of putting yourself in their shoes. And one objection that I did not bring up in my paper regarding this topic is when something that is potentially thought of as Lee is actually bad. For example, the early American view that slaves were the property of their masters and thus were subject to whatever the master's wishes were, however vile. I think that this was a social establishment at the time, but nevertheless, this and other things that may be similarly bad or just bad in general are not in line with Lee, for they arguably do not bring about social harmony. And even more than that, they are not in line with the golden rule. The masters weren't treating their slaves how they would want to be treated at all. And so anything that claims to be in line with Lee should have these aspects, or else they should be shunned. And the next point that I would like to go into is the question of what about my feelings? What about when I feel like my feelings are being controlled or manipulated by other people's expectations? In the paper that I provided by Judith Martin, she talks about how some people see etiquette, which is actually an aspect of Lee, as a hindrance to true feelings and emotions. For example, if you are mad, why should you have to say thank you for a favor? The truth may be that you are not thankful, but you are angry. So following true emotion and feeling should allow you to just be angry and not pretend that you are thankful. One of the examples that Judith Martin gives is that if you're at a funeral and you see someone who has some whipped cream hanging off their nose or something, and you find it funny, in your inclination of feeling, should you just burst out in laughter? Or because you're at a funeral, should you continue to somber and show respect for the event and who it's being held for? The two principles behind answering this dilemma is that there is a time and a place that calls for certain behavior, and that adequate actually helps guide our feelings to better social harmony and even to really grasp our truest nature. This nature lies behind our universal values. So your nature will say over your inclination to laugh that you want to be respectful. For this is what you would want. You would want some kind of respect shown towards a funeral that was held for you. And lastly, I wanted to add an element regarding universal values being behind various practices to politics. And so something that I found interesting in further ponderance on this discussion is how universal values behind Lee can actually be potentially applied to some political views. And so a simple yet controversial example are the differing views on abortion. And so for the pro-choice side, values that may lie behind their view include liberty, utility, human rights, or equality. And for the pro-life side, values could actually include the exact same thing. Nevertheless, liberty, utility, human rights, and equality are applied in different ways, much like how universal values behind Lee are applied in different ways of actions depending on culture and society. For the pro-choice and pro-life sides, it could include liberty of the mother versus liberty of the fetus, utility and choice slash freedom or utility and life, human rights for the mother or human rights for the fetus, and equality between man and woman or equality between baby and mother. These are things that are kind of we see as universal values, but yet based on the views kind of contradict each other. So could this potentially help us heal any of the political divide in our country by helping us relate to the values we share and how to appropriately apply them? I kind of wanted to know what y'all thought about this. Are there ways to maybe transcend this divide where we get mad at each other for our views while not necessarily looking at the values that might lie behind our views and how we can actually relate and maybe compromise through those values? So yeah, just let me know what y'all think of that. But yeah, that is my presentation. The purpose of this presentation was to make sense of the value of Lee through a Confucian worldview, providing my own explanations when necessary. Additionally, I was trying to refute the idea that Lee is artificial and thus should not be practiced, and open a new realm of potential understanding by realizing the universal values that may lie behind differing political views as well. Please let me know what you all think through the discussion module. Feel free to answer the questions that I posted earlier in the outline or ask some clarification questions. I'd be happy to answer those as well. Stay safe, y'all. It's crazy out there right now. Social distancing, stay at home, watch some Netflix and stuff. But I hope to see y'all again someday. I know this is my last semester, but I hope that I get to see y'all. I wish y'all the best of luck, and thank you so much.